Hey guys, coming in for Doctor Who, Series 9, Episode 11, Heaven Sent. And I was definitely looking forward to this episode for two reasons. One, of course, after the mind-blowing cliffhanger with Clara sacrificing herself last week, I really didn't know what was going to happen this episode. And plus, I knew that these final two episodes are just the Doctor. And this was a very risky episode because of the fact that Peter Capaldi's all on his own. And I heard this really hasn't happened a lot. This is one of the first times this has happened, and I think that's really interesting that we saw that here. And I really didn't know what was going to happen in this episode. And I have to say, this was a much different episode than anything we have seen on Doctor Who, and I really love that. Like I said, it was a very risky episode, and because that, I really didn't know what was going to happen in this episode. In fact, I was genuinely like, I don't really know what's going to happen here, but I don't really need to know. This is not really one of those cases where I need to know what's going to happen because I was just really looking forward to it. I didn't really know what we were going to get here, and regardless of that, I was really anticipating it, and damn was it worthwhile. I mean, I think we have been waiting all season, all this is something we've been waiting for all series long, for Peter Capaldi to get that Doctor-centric episode by himself, and he really gave an amazing performance here. But like I said, it was a very different episode. This wasn't the typical, you go on an adventure, and that's what happens here. There's something happening to the Doctor in this episode, which I really loved. It was an extremely cathartic episode, I have to say, mainly because it really reminded me of this week's episode of The Leftovers. You know, when Kevin was in purgatory, very much reminded me what happened with the Doctor in this episode. The Doctor is not only really heartbroken over Clara's death, he's also kind of in his own purgatory, and I'll get into that. Basically, we start off with this really nice speech from Scenes of a Castle. He's talking about how when you're born, something else is also born. He moves it moves towards you slowly, never stopping until that final hour. It's a really nice speech, and there are scenes around the castle that get explained later. We have no idea what's going on. He's basically talking to this creature. He's like, I don't know what you're doing. I will find you, I will get you, and I will destroy you. And I was thinking he was talking to the Raven. That's what he was going to go after. He was going to go after the Raven. There's a lot more going on here. We see this bloody hand disappears as the Doctor appears in the teleporter, and he opens the door and walks out, flashing back to Clara's death, and it's really interesting. He picks up the sand on the floor at his feet and examines it, and the Doctor explains to whoever's listening that he's not weak from the loss. He will find whoever's responsible for her death, and he's not listening to Clara. He wants revenge, even though Clara told him to not, get vengeance and not, let this change him. He is gonna let this change him, and I thought that what the Doctor was gonna do. I mean, I didn't think that the Doctor was gonna listen to Clara. The Doctor has his own way of doing things, and I really like seeing that here. It's very interesting what happened with the Doctor here. You don't really know what's going to happen. He finds this spade, and definitely was very interesting here, and basically we then see that the Doctor is teleported into this glass chamber located in a structure resembling a large castle, and upon investigating the surrounding corridors, he finds a series of screens scattered around the castle. The screens relay the vision of a mummified veiled creature which is constantly stalking the Doctor around the building. We don't know what this creature is, and it chases the Doctor to a dead end, admitting that he sees no way to escape death. The Doctor confessed that he's actually afraid to die, and the Doctor we see in this episode is way different than any other time we've seen the Doctor thus far, Peter Capaldi's Doctor. Because the thing about Peter Capaldi in this episode is that he's genuinely scared because he's by himself. He's usually the one in control. He's usually the leader here. And when he's not the leader, he freaks out, and he doesn't know how to feel when he's not in control. He's not used to it, and therefore it terrifies him. And just seeing that in this episode was incredible. And that's only one of the incredible scenes we get in this episode. I mean, that only shows the different Doctor we have here. So the entire castle structure rotates, reconfigures in response, opening an exit at the end of the corridor that the Doctor was trapped in, beyond which is a bedroom with an ancient faded portrait of Clara, and it's really interesting when we get here, because the Doctor keeps going back to the TARDIS in this episode, and he's talking to I guess the ghost of Clara, and he opens the door and it's really interesting what's going on here. He finds this spade, and we learn here that the Doctor hates gardening, but that digging with a different shovel leads him to a clue to getting out of there. There's a monitor on the wall that turns as he sees he's being watched by the veil across the way, and basically just when it seems like all hope is lost, he says he's actually afraid of dying. The veil freezes. The confession causes the walls to rotate. He ends up in a nice bedroom, and like I said, there's an ancient picture of Clara above the mantle. He tries to figure out this is some kind of trap, prison, or torture chamber, and he considers that anyone foolish enough to steal his bad dream should know better, and that he has the advantage in whatever this place is, since its design was to scare him. So as the veil approaches, he breaks the window and jumps out, and he then finds himself in his mind palace, which is just the TARDIS. His mind palace in this episode is the TARDIS. And that definitely does make sense, because where does the Doctor do most of his thinking? The TARDIS. Where does he always go back to is the TARDIS. This entire episode, he keeps going back to this TARDIS, and he realizes that the experience is some kind of interrogation, which is why he chose to jump, and while he's thinking about all this, he's actually falling. He's not actually in the TARDIS, and I was a bit confused. It took me a couple minutes to realize he's not actually in this TARDIS, and he speaks to Clara, who's on the TARDIS, back to him, and I love the way this was done. You see that there is this, her back is to him the entire time, but he is imagining that Clara's back with him to basically keep himself sane. If Clara's not actually there, he's gonna go insane because he's so used to Clara being there. He clearly does not like change. He's afraid of change, and I think it's very interesting that we found out that the Doctor is afraid of change, because why wouldn't he be afraid of change? And he's acting like his normal self. He's basically trying not to freak out. He tells her that he's going to explain to her how he survives, and realizing that the castle is in water, he makes the choice to dive, calculating everything down to how long it will take to lose consciousness just as everything goes black. And as he comes to in his mind, he works hard not to succumb to the efforts of nearly drowning, and Clara writes questions for him to solve in a chalkboard, and that is, what is this place? What do you say to make the creature stop? And while he battles, even bothering to answer these questions, he actually opens his eyes underwater, and he's swimming down towards a sea of skulls and immediately propels his body upwards. And we'll get into what the sea of skulls represents, because at first I'm like, what is they really trying to show here? Why are we seeing the sea of skulls? What is it all about? We didn't really know what was going on here, and I like seeing that. So he returns to the castle, finding a room with a fireplace where exact copies of his clothes are drying. He swaps his wet clothes for the dried copies, leaving his old clothes drying in the same fashion as the copies he found. Entering a courtyard of the castle, the Doctor finds a fresh grave and a spade, concluding that he's meant to dig up the grave. And basically, it's really interesting what's going on here. Once again, inside the castle, he speaks to Clara in his mind somewhere, realizing the right questions he should be asking, and enters the garden where he sees another spade, decides to dig around an area that looks like a grave. The Veil tries to enter the garden, but he blocks the door with a shovel, unearths a plaque of some sort that says, I am in 12, and the creature approaches him. And when he says, I am in 12, I'm like, oh, he's the 12th Doctor, that's what he's referring to. So the creature approaches him and causes almost another near-death experience. The Doctor realizes that he needs to tell truths he's never told before to stop the Veil. And this is where the episode gets amazing. It was already an amazing episode, but this is really where I'm like, okay, this is really something awesome. And by the way, if Peter Capaldi does not get nominated for an Emmy, I don't know what's wrong with everyone, because after this episode, he needs to. And this is worrisome because they're just truths he can never tell. These are truths that he can never tell, that he's been told he can never tell, that he's never told before, and he doesn't really know what's going to happen. So after coming to the conclusion, he immediately tells the Veil that he lied about leaving Gallifrey. And this is a very interesting reveal. And I didn't really feel like this was going to be something big, but we knew that that confession dial had to have some kind of significance. We've been hearing about it all season long. Ashiter took the confession dial, and we knew that that had to do with something. I just didn't really know what that significance was yet, and what exactly it had to do with anything, because I thought that was definitely interesting that we heard about this confession dial. He admits that he lied, that he originally left Gallifrey because he was bored, and in reality, he did it out of fear. He was scared. He didn't want to leave. That's why he left, because he was scared of what was going to happen. And the walls shift again. The Doctor re-enters the castle. He sits in his room, explaining to Clara how he spent his days, how he has figured out how to keep as far away from the Veil as possible, and he used the time to gives him room to look for room 12. He learns that every room tidies itself up after he leaves, and believes he's in some kind of closed energy loop or hell. So he is in hell, basically. And this is interesting because we're not really sure what's going on here, and I'm pretty sure it is hell because that's what the Doctor is most afraid of. He clearly is most afraid of being in this torture, and not only is the Doctor having to get over Clara's death, but just realizing he has to do all this is definitely very interesting. By the way, I love the music in this episode. They use this like classical music the entire episode, very different than any episode, and it really, I think, worked with the significance of this episode very well. So the Doctor searches the castle for room 12, and he finds the rooms of the castle are constantly resetting themselves as rooms that he revisits have any changes he has made revert by the time he returns. And upon finally tracking down room 12, the Doctor finds the door leads to another dead end and realizes that he will need to confess to the Veil again to change that castle's configuration to open the way behind. He has the way beyond. He just hasn't told the right secrets yet. And I was just trying to think, what else is there to tell? What else is his confession here? So returning to the teleporter room where he first arrived, he finds a skull next to the word bird written into some sand. Inspecting the stars again, the Doctor mused that 7,000 years must have passed since he was teleported. So not only did he just use Clara, we basically realized that this episode takes place 7,000 years after the last episode. 7,000 years this has been happening. He has been teleporting for 7,000 years, and that is incredible the way the episode turned that way. I mean, talk about a mindfuck there, but I think they really handled it very, very well, and I definitely really like that. I mean, the way that was handled was really great. So the Doctor places the skull, and we realize these skulls are not just skulls. They are the skulls of the aging doctors, all the doctors that have been there for 7,000 years, because again, this happens over and over again. All of those skulls are the doctors that have done this over and over again. So I think that's very interesting the way we saw that, and just finding out what's going on there. He doesn't really know what's going on yet. So the Veil approaches as always. The Doctor mentions that he knows about the hybrid. It's enough of a confession to get the walls moving again. He knows, what's going on with the hybrid, and basically returning to the teleport room where he first arrived, he finds a skull next to the word bird, and basically he confessed that he knows where the hybrid prophesied by the Time Lords is and where to find it. This opens the route through door 12, revealing a large wall made of asbantium, a crystalline substance 400 times tougher than diamond. And the Doctor realizes the message bird found in the teleporter room was a reference to the Shepherd Boy by the Brothers Grimm, featuring a bird which slowly weathers away a mountain with its brakes. So essentially the word bird is his only way out of here. That's kind of what he's thinking, because the bird got away from this mountain. That's how the Doctor gets out of this room. So the Doctor begins to punch the asbantium wall until the Veil catches up to him, touching his skin and burning him. The Veil's touch disables the Doctor's regeneration process, but the Doctor is able to claw his way back to the teleporter chamber. As each chamber resets after the Doctor leaves, the teleporter chamber has been reset to its state before he initially arrived, and thus carries a copy of him as he was at the conclusion of Face the Raven. So the Doctor has been a recurring cycle for the past 7,000 years, starting with a copy of him emerging from the teleporter and ending with him sacrificing himself to generate a new copy to continue wearing down the asbantium wall. Now, that is true, because we know the Doctor regenerates every so often, but this is different. He's kind of in his own prison now. He's stuck here. Just the fact this has happened to him, none of this is actually happening. He's stuck here, and he basically, we realize, is trapped in his confession dial. That's where he is right now. So the Doctor connects himself up to the teleporter and burns himself up, giving it the energy it needs to generate a copy of himself from the data stored inside. And the Doctor writes the word bird inside the sand before disintegrating, restarting the cycle. And I thought that was very smart that the Doctor did that, obviously, because he didn't really know what to do here. And he's having a psychotic break at this point. He wants to keep fighting. He's tired of the burdens he bears, but the chalkboard suggests that he wins. And in the next scene, I love the scene where he had the sonic sunglasses on. I thought that was awesome. Because there's something weird going on. He dramatically removes them as he comes across a giant wall of some kind of mineral that's tougher than diamonds. And the word home flashes across, disappearing. He believes he's one confession away from getting there. He makes the connection to the word bird, like I just said. That whole thing happens. I forgot to talk about the scene with Clara, though, because we do see Clara briefly in this episode, which is pretty much his motivation right now. Just seeing Clara, that's what motivates him. He says he can remember it all no matter what she'll be gone, and he sits and starts to cry. But Clara's voice answers him. She tells him that everyone has dealt with loss and he needs to get over it, beat this, and win. And I thought that was perfect advice because that perfectly sums up how he's feeling about Clara. He's not getting over her death. He needs to get over it. He needs to move on because he's going to get a new companion. He's going to get out of there if he just gets over what's going on. So next we see him stand up to the Veil. He will not give up the secrets of the hybrid, and instead he punches the wall toward home, and he talks about how dangerous secret the hybrid is and decides that he's going to do something worse. He's going to get out and find out who put him there. So he begins to tell his story as the Veil approaches, ultimately getting its hands on him. When he falls to the floor, the Veil vanishes. Even with no ability to regenerate, a Time Lord's body still tries to fix itself, and they can spend several days dying. He climbs up the tower on his hands, knees, realizing that there were never any other prisoners in his personal hell. This place was for him and him alone. There was no one else there. And just finding that out, that all these heads are him, is just so crazy to think about. The fact that he's done this to himself is just insane. And when you think about it, it really does make sense because of what Clara did. The companion is not supposed to be as smart as the Doctor, and Clara proved herself to be smarter than the Doctor. And, she's not just as smart, she was simply smarter than the Doctor, and that's kind of why this is happening to the Doctor. He's basically having to face, his greatest fears to get over Clara's death. So it turns out that he hasn't traveled, but just been there a very, very long time. He reaches the teleportation room, realizes that all the rooms returned to the way he left it. There would be a copy of himself inside the hard drive just when he was arrived. And he comes on some wasteland, picks up his confession dial, which is where he was all along, and I love finding this out at the end of this episode. I thought this was a great scene at the end here. He continues to go through the cycle for billions of years. We basically see the same thing going on over and over and over again. I like the way this was done. It's kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? I thought that was very well done the way we saw this, and chipping away a little bit more of the Asbantium wall in room 12, and eventually manages to break through the wall. The Doctor steps out into a desert landscape overlooking the Citadel and Gallifrey. The hole behind him closed, revealing that, like I said, it was just his confession dial all along. That's where he was. He was trapped inside it, and I love that reveal. We find out that what was going on, and a small boy then approaches the Doctor, tells the boy to tell the Time Lords that he has returned. He then proclaims that the hybrid prophesies to conquer Gallifrey. He is the hybrid, and that's how the episode ends. So now we know what the big secret the Doctor has been hiding is, that he is the hybrid, and that's what's been going on there. It was never a Dalek Time Lord hybrid that was meant to conquer Gallifrey, but instead the Doctor. And basically, the Doctor is going back to Gallifrey, so we don't really know what's going to happen here. And I love that, and this episode overall, oh my god, such a great episode. Really, there was so much to love about it. There was so much put into this, and I just loved everything put in this episode. The creativity put in this episode was just fantastic. The way this episode was written, I thought was amazing. The way they tried to get just the most weirdest shit in this episode, I thought was really great. I mean, we really felt like we're trapped with the Doctor. This entire episode, I really felt trapped, like I was missing something, like we weren't getting what we wanted to see. And that's exactly how the Doctor felt. Like, I was wondering, why does this episode feel different? That's how the Doctor feels. The Doctor is no longer in this period of normalcy. We think we know Doctor Who. This episode proved we don't know Doctor Who at all. This is the Doctor's greatest fear, to have something different. And to have this episode be something completely different, I think is great, because it could have easily failed. But because the way this episode was done, I thought it was really great. I felt like I was on my own personal ride with the Doctor, and I really love that. Now, a lot of people are expecting that the Doctor might actually regenerate in the next episode, and that could very well happen. But there is most likely speculation that he is in the Christmas episode, unless they've been trolling us all along and there's something more going on there, and maybe he's on Gallifrey. I kind of feel like the Doctor is going to have to spend a lot of time on Gallifrey. Like, maybe all next season, he's going to be stuck on Gallifrey while there's another Doctor out there. I'm not really sure what they're going to do with this, but this is definitely very interesting. It definitely, I think, is the most personal we've gotten on Doctor Who, and I really love that. I mean, he really is going to have to question himself and question what he's doing here. Is he still the Doctor, or is he simply just a hybrid? Who is he really? Has he been hiding as the Doctor all along? I mean, there definitely is a lot of questions as to what's going on here, and I definitely really like that. Also, the big thing is he needs to come to terms with Clara's death. Obviously, he's afraid of coming to terms that he doesn't want to admit that he misses Clara. He doesn't want to admit that normalcy is gone, that he just doesn't have that same bond he had with her. He wants her back, and he can never get back that bond he had. It's completely gone, and just losing his one companion has just broken him completely. I love seeing that. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens after this. Definitely I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen with that. And Peter Capaldi in this episode, my God, was he amazing. Seriously. Like I said, if he does not get nominated for an Emmy after this episode, I don't know what's wrong, because this entire episode, he carried it very well. I was entered the entire time because of Peter Capaldi and just everything that was going on. I thought was very well done. I absolutely loved it. It was really a mind fuck of an episode, but I really think they handled it very, very well. It does appear we're seeing Ashiter next week, who it would make sense because she's the one that has that confession dial. How's he going to get out of it? I don't know. Is he really on Gallifrey, or is this just in his mind? We don't really know at this point. I feel like his mind palace is what's going to get him out of this. You know, his mind palace is no longer the TARDIS now. His mind palace now has to be Gallifrey, because he needs to right the wrongs of what he does here and change something. We don't exactly know what he's going to change. I don't exactly know what he's going to do. I have no idea what's going to happen in the finale next week, and I definitely really love that. I like the not knowing. I like him, you know, I like not knowing what's going to happen. I feel like everything we've been seeing this season is finally going to come to a halt, and it would definitely make sense because this entire season has dealt with themes like death and, you know, just inevitability and things like that, and that's exactly what I think next week's episode is going to be about. But let me know what you guys saw this episode. This episode was absolutely incredible. By far the best episode of the season. I mean, seriously, such an incredible episode. I loved every minute of it. Peter Capaldi, like I said, carried it so well. I cannot wait for next week's episode, and I will see you guys in my next video, which will be for tonight's episode of Ash vs. Evil Dead, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.